Kommen Sie rüber, oder?
Wofür ist das? So, then we stay here. So, hello everyone. It's very good to be here, very good to see you. Thank you for coming. We will change tack just a little bit. First of all, this is an English conversation because not all of us are native German speakers. And secondly, we will be talking about a very exciting topic. My name is Alena Büchs. I am one of the directors of the summit, and I'm a professor of ethics in medicine and health technology at TUM University. And it is my pleasure today to host a spectacular panel on, and that's a very complicated title, Poly-Crisis versus Poly-Chances, Sustainability of our AI and Robotics Solutions. So we're very much forward-looking today, and I have a wonderful group of panelists here. To the very right, Alexander Britz. He's a public sector segment lead at Microsoft Germany. Thank you, Alexander, for being here.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
We have, where is she? Dr. Caitlin Corrigan, Executive Director at the TUM Institute for Ethics in Artificial Intelligence. Lovely to have you, Caitlin. We have Professor Virginia Dignam. She's professor in responsible artificial intelligence and the scientific director of a national Swedish initiative on AI and the humanities, which is called WASP-HS. I love that. And she's a professor at Umeå University in Sweden. And we have, last but not least, Lara Waltersmann. She's a group leader at the Fraunhofer Institute for Manufacturing, Engineering and Automation. So as you can see, we have a very wide range of expertise here, ranging from the scientific and research sector into those who develop products and sell them. I want to start with just a very few words of what you can expect, what we will cover, because it's a very, very broad topic. As you know, as societies, we're facing not just one crisis, but several at the same time. We've just come out of the pandemic and immediately faced a war, an energy crisis, inflation, and above everything, the climate crisis. And I think at this point in time, most people have understood that we have some very intense transformations, social transformations ahead of us. And obviously one of the questions is, what can society do to address these transformations, and how can technology, particularly cutting-edge technology, help us? And one of the things that you hear quite a lot is that AI and robotics, in particular embodied AI, can be very valuable to address some of these challenges. But of course, AI itself might contribute to the problem. I know many of you will be aware of that, but the carbon footprint of, for example, training machine learning algorithms is quite intense. So just to give you an idea, Google's AlphaGo has a carbon footprint of training of roughly 40 hours of training that is equivalent to 1,000 hours of a plane flying. So that's not nothing, that's quite intense. And many of you who work in development will know that the carbon footprint is one of the big challenges. And in a world where we need to cut down on energy use, particularly energy use from fossil fuels, this is one of the major challenges. On the other hand, the idea is, of course, that these technologies will help us to make energy use more efficient in the first place, will help us to change industry processes and make them more carbon efficient, and will help us to optimize different types of uses so that the environment isn't hurt as much. So there's a balance that we need to strike, which is why we discuss this at an ethics roundtable, because that's what ethics does. We try to balance the social goods, the different principles that come together in a particular field, and try to give recommendations on how to proceed. And with that, we do want to start with a little bit of a showcase of examples. And the first question to the panel is, I'd like to ask my panelists, and Alexander, if it's okay, I'd like to start with you.
Sure.
Could you give us an example of where AI is already used or has been used to address a sustainability goal?
Sure. Let me start with like a bigger frame and then make it specific. One of the things where AI can really be extremely beneficial is the optimization of use of resources in whatever shape or form. You know, if you see the amount of miles we are driving with cars, you know, delivering stuff, all the kind of resources we're actually using to produce certain things, AI can optimize that and make sure that we are using just as much resources as actually needed. Now, while this is a big topic, make that very simple and very clear. We have worked on one project with a customer, which I personally like because it's small and tangible, where AI is actually used in a retail setting, where you have a shelf and you actually put fresh food on. And AI is predicting how much of this fresh food is actually going to be sold, just to ensure we are not producing any fresh food that later on is thrown away. And you can use that kind of example in lots of different settings where we're saying, okay, if we manage to use technology in a way that we use optimized resources in a society where we today throw away a lot of stuff and all sorts, then this is a major contribution that AI can give.
Wow, that's a fantastic example. Across the EU, between 30 and 40% of all food is wasted.
Yes.
So that's an enormous amount, obviously would have a significant impact on the carbon footprint. Let's keep with the order that we had when introducing Caitlin. Do you have an example for us where AI has contributed to increase sustainability?
Yeah, I'll talk about one project that I'm working on right now, which is actually looking at the use of AI in the extractive industries, right? So the extractive industries are going to play a major role in our transition away from carbon-intensive things like automobiles, you know, the need for these high-efficiency batteries, right? But there's a lot of ways AI is already being used, and we hope can be even better used to make that more efficient. It's being used to look at things like productivity, where are the best places to actually mine or dig or drill, which can be used for good or bad, as I think we'll get into here, because it also makes it easier to mine hydrocarbons, for instance. But what we're doing is trying to look at how can we bring lots of different types of data into the process that look at not just economic productivity, but also environmental and land use or social factors and governance factors into this process so that companies, but also governments and communities can come together and make the best decisions for how to use their land and get these valuable minerals out of the ground in a more sustainable way.
Fantastic. That sounds very exciting. Thank you so much. Virginia, do you have an example for us?
Sure, I even have two.
Oh, that's good.
And they both are in biodiversity, which probably is not the first thing we think about how to use AI in sustainability. One of them is a cooperation which is going already for quite some years between the Wildlife Foundation and some universities on poaching, on tracking poachers in the large African natural reserves, and especially the poaching of rhinos and elephants. So they can much better predict where poachers will be, and that therefore using the rangers' resources the most efficient possible. The other one is research that we are doing ourselves in Umeå, Sweden. Umeå is almost at Arctic Circle, so we are way in the north, and we are using AI to track the melting of permafrost and at the same time understand how the melting of permafrost is influencing the changes in the migration of moose and reindeer.
That sounds like a very Swedish.
Very Swedish. I mean, it's important for all. And if somewhere climate is really making an impact, is in the very north and the very south of the world. So both the Arctic and Antarctic, it's where things are changing significantly. You can see it from one to the other year. Moose and reindeer are being affected, not only in Sweden, but all over the north, the Arctic Circle. And it's part of ensuring that biodiversity and that the permafrost, that it's melting, and we at this moment cannot really do much more about that it is melting, except to hope that we can cut on the acceleration of the melting, but at least we can try to combine the understanding how it is melting and how can we support the migrations of these large animals.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Lara, do you have it? I know that at Fraunhofer there are lots of initiatives trying to improve the sustainability of the algorithms, for example, that you're developing. Do you have an example for us?
Yes, I do. As I come from a production engineering institute, because we have a lot of institutes at Fraunhofer, I'm going to present or give you an example from production. So we did a study where we looked at different use cases, and there were like 2 use cases pretty related to each other. So first, the recycling. When we look at our recycling, you can use AI and image recognition to sort our waste more efficiently and to have like a better quality of the end product of the sorted waste, and then it can use for secondary material more easily. And AI is also needed for then processing this material, the secondary material, because the secondary material is mostly, for example, in plastics, it's not as high quality as the primary material. So the quality has a higher range of parameters. So that's why we then, for the processing, need AI to have like a really fast parameter change and then to ensure the product quality in the end.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I was just checking because I also want to add an example. We have one of the excellence clusters at TUM that is my colleague Zhang Zheng runs it. It's a very data intensive initiative where they're trying to use satellite data and all kinds of other types of data to monitor different regions in the world for all kinds of patterns, from weather patterns to sort of ground temperature, waste management, the way populations move, really, really high level, but sort of drilling down to particular aspects where people actually live to improve planning of a number of sustainability initiatives. So this is it's a huge initiative that brings together very many partners, and that was my first real contact with sustainability with AI for sustainability, but I actually didn't think that we would have a range from food waste to moose migration. So it is a very, very broad area. And that actually brings me to one of the more complicated questions. Virginia, I do want to start with you.
Sure.
If you have a field like that, that literally sort of starts in the warehouses, right, in the cooling houses for produce on the one hand, and then goes into highest level data tracking with all the other stuff in between, production, of course, and all the other interesting things. Are there any overarching ethical or even legal, actually? I would be surprised if you had something, but do enlighten us. Are there any overarching principles or frameworks that we could use to guide us in terms of where should things go and how can they proceed as sort of socially responsible as possible?
There is indeed a lot of guidelines in terms of social responsibility. It is off. No, it's okay. So there is a lot of work being done in terms of social responsibility, and all organizations in the world are one way or another aware of their own responsibility. One area is regulation is also coming up, but the regulation can only do so much, and regulation is one of the many. It's not going to solve the whole issue. It can get sanctions. It get, but I think that awareness is the most important, and it starts with us. It starts with developers and the researchers. For instance, if you publish in AI, the criteria in which your work is being evaluated is in terms of the accuracy that your algorithms are improving. So that's a very important way of measuring quality of research, is in terms of the accuracy of and improvements in accuracy, improvements in optimization of the algorithms that you develop. No one is asking us as researchers to put a cost in this accuracy. Is a 0.5% improvement of accuracy worth 10% more of computational resources, of energy resources? These questions we are not asking ourselves. So the social responsibility starts also with us, the developers and the researchers in AI, and at the same time it requires a much more integration and participation of society. Like you say, from food waste to moose migration, there is a whole world and all different types of communities involved. The communities, the Sami communities in the north in the Arctic, to the communities that produce and develop the food that we all eat. We do need to get their participation much more involved. And this we can do much more by awareness and responsibility than by regulation.
But can I push you on this? So I have another hat. I'm the head of the German Ethics Council. We just did a big thing on AI. So I run around and talk to politicians quite a lot. And I'm not aware...
It's fixed.
Okay, it's
Excellent.
fixed. Good.
Otherwise we would have to share mics.
Yeah, it's okay.
We could deal.
Yeah.
We could deal. We're flexible. Are there any very specific initiatives on this already? Because we know there are lots and lots of regulatory initiatives on explainable AI, and you know, as part of the EU regulation, there are a lot of things. But is there anything specific in either a country that you're aware of or at the European level on sustainability?
Not at the regulation level. So the AI Act, which is recently being approved at the European Parliament and is going to become a regulation or a law in European countries within a couple of years or a couple of months. There is a reference to welfare and to sustainability, but it's more like one of the many risks, so there is no explicit way to address it. But at the same time, what we do have, and I think that can be the basis, are the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to which all of us, as European and all the United Nations countries, have committed to, by 2030, really make a significant impact in the Sustainable Development Goals. And there are quite some initiatives and also quite some principles and guidance and support. I did that around the education and children, but I know that there are in many other fields some concrete proposals or guidelines on how to do things, but not necessarily only for AI, but to all of us in general.
Thank you, and thank you for referencing the Sustainable Development Goals. Most of you will know that, but that is actually a little bit of depressing information, because we need punch, right? Yeah. This needs to happen. We need to reach the goals.
We are delayed.
We need to reach our national climate goals. We need to reach global sustainability goals. And so my question, and I guess you've been expecting that, Alexander, can you tell us, do we need to push you guys? I mean, do we need to force companies to reach sustainability goals, or do you think this is something where companies have their own incentive already? What would you say, what's the responsibility of companies, and how can societies incentivize that, let's put it that way, most effectively?
All right, that's a bunch of questions now.
I know.
Now,
you have 3 minutes, just kidding.
Now, do companies need to be pushed? Absolutely. I firmly believe there's a good number of companies that have very ambitious goals set for themselves, and that's good. But I think we need to make sure that everyone understands how urgent it is and what actually can be done and how it can be done. And therefore, regulation, forcing companies to do a certain amount of things is absolutely helpful / needed. That's
you heard it,
no,
right?
absolutely. No question on that one. Now, what does it mean in terms of, and you said also, how come does that all come together? If you look into a company, I guess one of the main challenges are, number one, ensuring that the sustainability thinking is embedded into everything you do. From designing a new product, to producing the product, to shipping the product, to maintaining the product, the whole value chain across the board. And that is tricky. I mean, if you think on, we see here some robots, and they're typically in production sites, and some of these production sites will live for like 40 years. That's an awfully long time to say, okay, I'm responsible for that, and I need to think that through. Still, it is needed. The other one where I think, we need to be better as an industry, all the industries, is providing transparency. And transparency also means at the end, I think as a customer, as a consumer, one would be better off if you could make a decision saying, I'm buying this product or I'm buying the other product, simply because I know what is, for example, the carbon footprint of one product or the other. And then to say, hey, this is maybe 10% more expensive, but I think this is worth spending 10% more because it is environmentally more friendly. Now, is it easy to provide this kind of transparency? No. However, if there would be a requirement to provide that kind of transparency, that's a good push. So in other words, I'm from Microsoft, we're in IT. If you would ask me on a certain laptop, for example, what is the carbon footprint, I can tell you. Now, if you go into a shop, you have all the laptops in front of you, and you wouldn't know. So if you would have a little sign and saying, okay, I can make an informed decision now, that is probably something helping a lot of people saying, I go for this one product or the other product. Now, the challenge with that, because you talked about obstacles, is this amounts a huge amount of data. We are trying to do that, and we are getting there. But for us, that, for example, means that we are getting the entire value chain from the raw materials that are needed to build IT servers that at the end of their value chain sort of end up in our data centers. We need to track everything, including bringing them at their end of life back into the value chain. That's billions and trillions of data points that you need to collect and that you need to work on, and that's where you actually apply AI. So long answer to a short question. Push is good, regulation is good, it's needed, yes.
That's a very strong statement. I do want to push you because that's
Sure.
absolutely fascinating. If you have to show the sustainability, or if you as a company want to improve the sustainability, you need that data anyway, right? I mean, you need the entire production chain mapped
Yes.
to understand what is the sustainability of this product. And then if you have that, you might as well share it with the consumer. Just one note of caution, I do want to hear what you have to to say about this. I've been involved in food labeling back in the day. And some of you might remember the terrible debates we had about these sort of traffic lights and all the certification of what's a healthy food and what's not a healthy food, right? And is it yellow, green, and red, and what? And it was a bit of a, to use a technical term, it was a clusterfuck. Sorry. I'm being very blunt. This is not streamed, is what they told me, so we can talk freely. And as you know, it took and I'm going to say this in a very friendly way, but
Right.
industry wasn't helpful in that process.
Yeah.
So this is fascinating to me that you guys now say, look, actually, we do want to work with this. That makes my heart sing, of course, because if it's such an uphill battle to get something like that in terms of transparency to the consumer, then that makes things, it takes forever. So would you say that these days industry, particularly your industry, is more open to this kind of stuff?
Definitely, absolutely. I would say so, and that's not only Microsoft, that's also others in the industry. There's a lot of efforts to provide that kind of transparency. Yes, it's hard. On the other hand, we might have a bit of an advantage. We're used to dealing with data, and in that sense, that's the world we're living in. And yes, these processes are difficult. And if I sort of roll back like 3 years when we started our efforts to get there, this means not only to look into every single process you have as a company, it means your entire supply chain and all the people that you work with have to be brought on board. And that is, if I look into, a company like Microsoft or, big automotive companies that we would also have in Germany, that tens of thousands of suppliers they actually have. And that's the kind of magnitude. On the other hand, very simple, you always have an 80-20 rule. You got to start somewhere and you have fairly quickly like 80% accuracy. And let's start with that and work on the last 20% later, and not being like 150% right in the first place, because that's going to take for
So what
way
he's
too long.
saying is, let's not be too German about this. And I couldn't agree more.
Can
Lara,
I just add one thing on this? Can
Sorry?
I add one thing?
Yes.
Yes. I can confirm indeed that I work with many of the large industries, and they all are actually, like you say, willing and able and prepared to do it. The other side is more complex. The policy is not ready. They are not agreeing. They are coming from all kinds of directions, and it becomes very difficult to get the willingness of the companies, the industrial side, because the policy side keeps going in circles. And as citizens or as consumers, we just sit there and walk and wait for something to happen.
I can see both Lara and Caitlin sort of chomping at the bit, because that is a very important point. Lara, as somebody who's also in the development context, what are the obstacles that we're sort of facing, particularly regarding this sort of industry is willing to go and the policy world is sort of, well, let's take this one step after the other and let's disagree on as many things as possible while we do that. Do you see the same problem?
Yes, I do. And a lot of obstacles were already mentioned. Lots of obstacles were already mentioned. As the data availability within companies, it's a huge problem because it's not clear which data is needed, where it is needed, and the big companies are starting to push it through the supply chains so that we also see from companies, for example, in the automotive sector. So that's a good sign that there is a willingness to have these data available. But it's really, the policy is still behind. So I think with the CSRD, so the directive to have a sustainability report now, which was from the EU. So I think this year they pushed it through through the parliament. It's a good initiative to start making these parameters really formal, to really have a strict regulation where they state, okay, you have to report these parameters and they are fixed, because that really makes it secure for the companies to have these parameters in the long term. So they know, okay, I have to report on my energy efficiency for the next years. So I need this data from all our sites. So then I can also report it to my consumer, for example, Microsoft or an automotive. It doesn't matter, or you, for example. So I think that's really important. The policy, I think they're working on it, but yes, it's way too slow.
Yes. So the clarity which is needed requires policymakers to understand. And Caitlin, before you come in, because I know you do research at the Institute on this, I'll do something that I usually don't do, which is to say I do understand that policy is behind on this. I mean, these are parliamentarians. They're not experts on the processes necessarily. They have people obviously working for them, but they might go from a meeting doing health policy to a meeting doing policy on the next sports event, and then to sustainability in AI policy. And the pace of development is incredible. So I understand that it's very difficult to write good, responsive policies on a field that is moving so quickly, and, as we've seen, that encompasses so many different things, and that is global. Let's be honest. There's no way to get around that, and policymakers will have to sort of shore up their game and might even have to use algorithms themselves. You know, ChatGPT can do amazing things, as we all know, but sometimes it doesn't. But there is a significant problem here. So I do want to make that clear, that it's not just something they're all lazy and they're so slow, but there is an expertise and resource problem at the policy-making level. So I'm really interested, Caitlin, is there something that we could, as researchers, do, as the ones who do basic research, not just on the technology, not just on the sustainability, but actually on how to get good ethics and policy in place? Is there something that we can do to help?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think. I hope so.
Was a rhetorical question, you know.
I mean, I think there are a lot of aspects of, for instance, the EU AI Act that could inform or take into account things like sustainability, but it depends on how we interpret and implement them, right? So now we're actually moving from just talking about AI ethics and AI governance, and even in our institute, moving into kind of the nitty-gritty of how is that going to be implemented. So for instance, we have one project looking at accountability. How can a company actually implement accountability for when AI goes wrong into their corporate structure in a way that hasn't happened before? So I think, I mean, a role, as researchers, we have a couple things that maybe in industry they don't. One is we have longer timelines often to look at things, right? So we can examine questions that maybe they can't in industry because they just have to move faster. We have a little bit longer time to think about things. So we're bringing in questions like inclusivity, right? When we're talking about sustainability, the global south is going to be the ones hit hardest by the climate change, right? By these climate policies. But actually almost all of AI development's going on in the global north, right? So data bias, inclusive ways of building AI, taking into account the applicability of how tools will work in settings where they weren't developed, are all things that we're starting to question and think about, and how do we bring the right stakeholders in? Because we don't have to think about profit right away, and we have a little bit longer time horizons to do it. Yeah, so those are just, you know.
Thank you. And just to do a little bit of an advertisement block for TUM, because that's what we're here for as well, of course. When generative AI sort of crashed into the market, ChatGPT in November, there was a great need in the world of policy making to get people to explain, developers, experts, what is this and what's it going to do and how can we regulate it? And so TUM formed a task force very quickly, an interdisciplinary task force with experts on policy and governance, but also on development and all kinds of different fields, ethics also involved. And we just went to brief policymakers. And I think that's something that we need to do a lot more, right? Industry has always been doing this, obviously, but also research. I think we should get out there and try and help people. So I have a final round for everybody, and I have two questions, and you can choose which one you want, unless you need to add something.
Yeah, I would
Please do, okay.
I would just like to add that you shouldn't only go to policymakers, but as we see, also go to industry and share your research with industry, because that's pretty important, because the industry will implement it. If they don't know about the inclusion or how to include people, or also how to develop sustainable AI or green AI, they can't do it, because that's also one that we saw, that know-how is sometimes just missing in the companies. So that's also important to go to industry.
And I think Alexander needs to say something about that.
No, it's about the topic you raised on the regulation. And again, I said, industry is doing a lot, but yes, there is industry that need to be pushed. We talked about that earlier. So regulation is good and regulation is needed. I mentioned that before. Now, the interesting thing in the terms of AI and the development of technology is the speed you mentioned. So the amount of new developments we've just seen early this year on AI is flabbergasting. Now, if you want to regulate that, then you see two worlds hitting each other right now. An enormous speed in development of technology and the thinking that a good regulation needs 3 to 5 years. Now, within 5 years, with the current speed of development, well, this regulation is going to be outdated after 7 months to start with. And I guess the fundamental issue that we need to solve together, and therefore your comment was really good right now, saying you've been doing these briefings, is can we think of drastically shorten the regulation process? It still has to be good. It has to be professional, it has to take, but it needs to be quicker. And right now, if you talk on the policy side, there's someone, no, it's going to take 3 to 5 years. And the other option in order to bring these two worlds back together would be to slow down technical development, and that's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen.
So in that sense, whatever we can do together, really, to take on that challenge and saying, how can we make sure we get good regulation? If you look at AI, ideally every 6 months, and we adapt it every 6 months, that would be the kind of time we would be looking at. And if you now settle for a year, okay, fine, but not 5.
Yes.
But
I
there
need
is
to-
another way.
Virginia,
There is another
come
way.
in.
I mean, we are regulating the wrong things. We are focusing in the wrong things on regulation. As a European citizen, I couldn't care less if a decision about me is made by an AI system, by a spreadsheet, or by a dice. If that thing impacts me, I want it to be regulated. So it's not about regulating the technology, not about regulating a specific method or another method and discuss forever, is this an AI method or not, and then we'll stay happily discussing the definition of AI forever. It's about regulating the impact. It's about demanding fairness. It's about demanding sustainability. It's about demanding inclusion. And then it's up to the industries to make sure that they are meeting this type of regulation. So we can do the things, but we need really to change the discourse.
So I have to come in on this point. It's horrible to moderate a panel like that. And I know I've been saying far more than usually a moderator does, but I do have to come in on this because I actually believe this is a super exciting moment for regulation. Because we can't keep doing it this way.
No.
That's not going to happen. So there are paradigm shifts ahead. One is the one that Virginia just... This is important stuff. Changing away from sort of regulating a technology or a set of technologies or even a process towards regulating, if you will, the outcome.
Exactly.
That's a paradigm shift, one thing. And I'm quite hopeful. Possibly not with this one that's already ongoing, because it's been in the works for years, right? The AI Act has been in the works for years. But maybe with some of the upcoming ones. And the second thing that many people are not aware, the time frame is legislated. It's not just something that they make up.
No.
I mean, in parliaments, different parliaments, you have different, oh Gott, wie sagt man, Fristen? Deadlines, thank you. You have deadlines, right? You have waiting periods. You have to include certain stakeholders. You have to do erste Lesung, zweite Lesung, dritte Lesung, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's just national.
Yeah.
Right? You have to involve all the institutions and so on. At the European level, it's even more complicated. So, I think the pressure of speeding these things up could actually help remodel the very idea of how we regulate.
Yeah.
And that is exciting to me.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to do it responsibly, but it's a no-brainer that it has to happen. So to me, something is currently breaking up.
Yeah.
And it's very exciting. You can sort of feel it when you go and you talk to high-level politicians and all these groups that sort of used to be very reticent to change anything in this process. Suddenly sort of spaces are opened up, and I'm very, very excited about this. I see some nodding. Does anybody want to come in on that point?
I mean, just one short comment. I mean, the good news on that is, we've seen in the pandemic and we've seen in the energy crisis that we're actually capable of making decisions fairly quickly.
Yep.
If we really want to and if we feel the pressure. So there's hope. That's what I'm trying to say. But
That would be a nice final word.
okay, that's it.
We still have one. We still have. You want to come in, Caitlin?
No, I mean, I just want to say, probably on the more negative side of that, though, we have to think about how government and policy actually works. And what I think is a fear of many is this path dependency, right? If we don't get the things in place correctly now, it's going to take another 5 or another 10 years to correct it, right? Because once companies get a go and say, this is how you have to do it, correcting the mechanisms will be even harder. So,
But you know what? I don't believe that. I don't know how familiar people are with the AI Act. But let me just give one example. We've now moved away slightly from the sustainability issue, but it's still in there. So the AI Act adopts a risk-based regulation approach where companies themselves, that's currently the draft, will be able to say where our product or our process is high risk, sort of mid-range risk or low risk. And there's a lot of criticism that producers can say that by themselves. And I know in our field, there's a very big discussion about this. Now, I will come out in the open and say, I think it's the right approach, because what I think we need to learn is, let's try this for a year or two, review it, and if it then doesn't work, because industry says, oh, it's all low risk, when it's face recognition, I don't know, in the supermarket or something like that, then we change it. Yeah. So I think the time is ripe to just not be like that in terms of path dependency. If we don't, that's the German approach. Like you said, 120%, let's be perfect about this from the beginning. And I think that's no longer possible, right? Put it in place. It has been discussed. It's not a stupid approach. It has worked in other areas before. So I'm not saying let's rip up all the regulation, but let's get a sensible regulation in place and let's just start with it and then change it if necessary, because we need a more flexible approach. Okay, this is an exciting topic to the nerds who have to do stuff with regulation, so apologies to all of you. I do want to give us a final quick round, everybody very briefly, but it's a whole different topic. It's still very important. There's plenty of young people here. This is the TUM campus, if you will. And one of the challenges that we, of course, have is that we don't have enough skilled labor for all of these fantastic things. So if you think about sustainability in AI, or AI for sustainability, what are your ideas on how do we get this into education? How do we get people excited about this? What do we have to do to make this sort of a central topic? Because it's one for the future, and we need to train people. Virginia, you want to take us ahead?
I think there are two ways possibly to do it. One is by bringing education much closer to specific cases and go study the moose in North Sweden. Your students are welcome, but really get into very concrete cases in which they see exactly what they do can be an impactful contribution to sustainability in all different facets of sustainability. The other one is kind of designing or defining the really interesting fundamental challenge. Like I say, how can we create the same accuracy with 10% less investment and resources and energy and computation? Those are really hard mathematical engineering type of challenges. It's not something which we are really focusing in education, but those are the kind of things which will excite students. How can we do the same quality or even better, but now use 10% of the energy that we used before?
Count the moose.
And count the moose, yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Virginia. Caitlin.
Yeah, I'm going to stick a little bit with that and say, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do, especially for students and universities, where funding is coming from and what they push, right? So pushing things like efficiency and lowering carbon footprints at the same time as increasing accuracy. We're also looking at, for instance, we have a network we run called the Responsible AI Network Africa, where we work with our partners in Ghana, and funding, and a huge part of it is sustainable development, sustainability. It's the type of tools they're interested in. And students the amount of students that came up to us and are interested in this topic was amazing. So now we're trying to work with funders to get funding specifically for training students on sustainable development related tools they can use in AI. So, I mean, a lot of it comes down to funding when you're talking about.
Excellent. Thank you for that point, Caitlin.
More funding.
Always important. So any research funders in the room, and we're standing in front of the Bavarian state government. That's an important area of funding, just so you know. Do you have anything to add, Lara?
Maybe just to be more practical orientated during the education, or when you're a student, maybe to have really not only the presentations of professors, but to have smaller groups to work on practical problems, maybe from companies, to show them your work, even as a student, has an impact, and here's how you can do it, and then they can directly apply it in the open world, in the economy, that they directly have an impact.
Thank you very much. Alexander, final words?
I think the good news on that is we don't have to get young people excited about the whole topic. there's other topics where we could say we need to push them a bit more, but on this specific topic of sustainability, they are excited. They see much more the pressure than maybe my generation sees. So that's good. What I guess we're missing in the education system, also early in school, to show them what they could do and what kind of profession there are in order to make a difference. Become a scientist, become an engineer, become all this, what kind of lever they actually would have if they would go into that. So if we could bridge that, the enthusiasm that exists with the possibilities they don't know about, then I think we have made an effort.
Yeah. Lovely. That's a very, very hopeful note. Thank you so much. That's us for now. Thank you so much to the fantastic panelists. You have fun, you enjoy. I hope you learned a little bit. I certainly learned a lot and I had a lot of fun. Thank you so much and see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.